Hey guys, it's Chaz Roberts with Law Have Mercy. On today's episode, I bring back our first ever guest, family lawyer Wesley Galjour. He was an awesome guest. We talk about community property, sole custody, all types of family law issues. We talk about work-life balance, what it's like to be your own boss. It's filled with content I know you'll enjoy. Tune in. Wes, I got you all the way out of court to come be with us again. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's Friday. I'm done with court for the week after 3 days in court. So looking forward to the weekend for sure.
Man, court weeks are especially difficult in our world. Not only do you burn a white shirt, or in your case, a blue shirt, you go to a dry cleaner and you bring like 10 shirts after a week or two, and it's like, man, I had a rough couple weeks.
Yeah, you can tell by the laundry how busy you've been in court.
What's going on in the family law world?
Just busy, unfortunately. Fortunately busy, tons of work, tons of people that need help out there. And I'm blessed to have been as busy as ever, put it that way.
What's cool is you were our actual first guest ever on Law Have Mercy. And I probably sent your podcast to at least 20, 30 people when they call me with family law questions. I'm like, look, Wes answered them all in this first podcast. Here you go.
Right.
Have people told you that they've heard you on the podcast?
Absolutely. 2 weeks ago, someone you had sent came to my office, retained me, and he's like, I saw you on the podcast, and after that was it. I wanted you to answer my questions specifically based on how I approached your questions at the last one.
Yeah, well, we covered a lot. I think we covered divorce, some child custody stuff. We talked about I've had a lot of questions about sole custody. That was one of the things that they wanted more specifics. Sole custody is pretty difficult to get, right?
Yes, sole custody, quite difficult. A judge who is no longer on the bench here in the 15th JDC used to say you need crack cocaine, abuse with a baseball bat, straight up abandonment, serious things. It's a totally different standard than joint custody. Sole custody is when the other party really has just visitation. They have no decision-making power. They don't have to even receive notice from the parent who has sole custody. So it's really all that bundle of rights, more or less, laying with one parent. You can get it, but it is quite difficult,
And I would imagine, look, our TikTok audience is actually I had somebody from Africa ask me a community property question. So it's a global audience. But I would imagine that the sole custody standard is pretty much universal in terms of you need something really bad in order to take some type of custody away from the other parent.
Correct. I would say in most states, especially southern states I'm most familiar with, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, it's something very serious. And usually when sole custody is given, it's in a very temporary nature. It's until the other parent can get clean drug screens or can move back into town after living out of state. Or, they might have been away for X amount of time, literally disappeared, whatever, shows back up, okay, get back involved in the kid's life. Very rarely do you get sole custody where it's ordered and it's finalized through the end, because the other parent's typically going to get a chance to make their case, come back in the child's life and have some decision.
Work their way back in,
Correct.
Essentially.
Correct.
And jump some hurdles and jump through some hoops and
right.
Work their way in with the court supervision.
Right. Prove to the court that you've met these certain child custody factors and that the child is deserving and you're deserving of being back in that life on a day-to-day decision-making basis.
And the reason I'm going through sole custody, I got a lot of questions about sole custody. Do you have people like go into your office where you represent the mother or the father and they want sole custody and you guys say, whoa, slow down?
Correct. Yeah. It's, I tell them, look, you have a chance, but there's no guarantee. Then sometimes I have had people, I had a lady come in 3 years ago where she knew the father didn't want to participate. She knew he just wanted out. He wanted to pay his child support, see his kids every other weekend, de minimis. And I got her sole custody because he was willing to sign off on it without a hearing. Never bucked it, never changed anything.
Yeah.
Other people that come in saying, I have this, this, and this. I'm saying, look, you can maybe get temporary sole custody for a while on this, but if that person fixes this issue, if they dump the bad, current boyfriend, girlfriend, if they get off of drugs, they could be worked in. The courts typically like to see a good success story.
Yeah, but look, you're a father. You probably talk to them and say, all right, I know there's some bad stuff going on, but do you really want the child not to have any contact with his father or his mother, right? I'm sure you counsel them on that too.
Absolutely. And it's unfortunate because people come in there thinking it's the best thing for their kid. And I tell them, no. Child psychiatrists say both parents having something. Anyone in a parental role, kids need it. The more the merrier. It's ideal to have that parenting figure from a male perspective and a female perspective. So sometimes I do have to counsel the client, bring them down a notch, saying, look, unless this person was really bad, abusing the child, they saw him doing drugs, doing X, Y, and Z, they need to be in the kid's life, at least in some kind of way. Maybe not on a day-to-day, but on a weekend basis where they're not making doctor's appointments, signing up for school extracurriculars, things of that nature.
One thing that we didn't spend a whole lot of time on is community property. I don't think we talked about community property, separate property, that kind of thing. I'd like to go into that in a little bit if you're down for it.
Sure.
Because there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to community property. And I think that's probably one of the biggest consequences of a divorce or even a marriage before the divorce is dealing with the assets when something happens. So I'd like to get into that in a little bit.
Sure. So basics for community property, you're kind of stuck with what you have unless you do something in advance. People always ask, okay, how can I get insurance for a divorce? How can you prepare if it happens? A prenuptial agreement, biggest thing. What's mine is mine. What's yours is yours. What's ours is ours. You can make it that simple where it's 3 buckets and you're putting things, you're not commingling things like that. You can also deal with spousal support to a certain degree in a prenuptial agreement as well. If people have that, they opt out of the legal regime of community property. Assets and gains is the old name.
Get that prenup is what
right.
They
get
say.
That prenup. Especially if you have enough assets. But then a lot of people, and I hear it from women, and frankly a few men too. I don't want to do a prenup. Am I dooming my marriage from the start if I get that?
And
prenup?
it's an awkward conversation.
Absolutely awkward. And you see the full range of facts. People come in 2 months after the engagement talking about a prenup. Sometimes they don't get married because of it. Some people come 2 weeks before the marriage and talk about it. Does that put a stress on it?
Are you I didn't have to worry about it because I didn't have anything when I got married. Do you have to have that conversation with your client? Okay, you want to pay me to do a prenup? You're broke. You have nothing to protect.
Right.
We cannot protect things that are acquired during the marriage, and you have nothing to protect on your own, so you really don't need a prenup.
Right. Well, you can protect some things that are acquired during the marriage. So if someone has a new business, they started it before the marriage, so it'll be separate property. But what about the fruits and revenues of that business? What about other growth and where they put the funds from that business? All can be very tangled, some very specific laws that have changed in the last 15 years on some of that as things go forward. So even if they are broke, they'll do it. Some people protect the other side from debt, coming in with $200,000 of doctor student loans. Are we going to pay that off during the community? Do they have a reimbursement claim for those kind of things? A lot of questions that can come up.
That's a good,
for sure.
Yeah. So technically, you are broke because you're $200,000 in debt. So we don't want to bring that and make that a marital obligation.
Correct. And it would be a separate property obligation because it's done before. But then there's all these little factors. If you were going to school while you were married and the other spouse is working 2 jobs to let you go, sometimes that minimizes the reimbursement claim. Sometimes other things come into play. And the thing is, community property can be something that's so specific where you look at case law, individual instances that match closely to your facts and apply it that way. On the other hand, some things are very broad. When you pay a $120,000 down payment on a house, that's going to be the community house with separate funds. Law's pretty clear. You only get half of that back.
Yeah.
And some people understand that beforehand. Some people don't. And they come in with either the wrong expectations, they were given wrong advice, or unreasonable expectations because they think they have it.
Well, we had a whole class on community property in law school, and it was a whole section of the bar, right? And not an easy section, especially when it comes to Louisiana law and all the presumptions in this. But since we're diving into community property law, I just want to give just a basic understanding of what community property is. That's what applies in Louisiana. I know there's several other states that apply community property law too. But it's basically like things that you own before the marriage are considered separate property. Things that you acquire during the marriage are usually considered or presumed to be community property. And the reason why that's important is that once you get a divorce, the things that are community property are going to be pretty much split, for lack of a better term. Right. So if you bought property before the marriage and then you build a house on it, it might still be considered separate property. Right. Correct. But if you get married on January 1st and you buy a tract of land on January 2nd, and then you build a home on January 30th, that's considered community property, even though you made all the money before you got married. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's several rules and exceptions and all that stuff. But just know that community property is a big deal.
It's a big deal, and
and you should have an attorney that's pretty well versed,
right? That knows and can explain it to you. It's
someone better than me. All right, don't call me about your community property questions. Call Wes.
No, and it's a lot, and it's more money, more problems, and every case is unique. So often we see one side of the family. Parents give them the lot behind there. Okay, so like you said, the lot is theirs. But then the spouse adds in on the mortgage. So the mortgage is there. Well, the house is tied to the land. So before you know it, that other spouse has the house. Clearly, the spouse who joined in the mortgage doesn't have ownership of the house, doesn't have ownership of the land, has a claim to the principal payments only made during the community.
Oh, not even the interest.
Not the interest. So if you're in year 3, and the interest is 95% of the payment, you're out of luck. Now, if you've been in that house 27 years, you have a big old reimbursement claim because the payments are flipped. It's 95% towards the principal, not towards the interest.
Wes, is that why some banks make, in that situation, and this is prominent in Louisiana, especially where I'm from, out in the country in Cecilia, where you have family tracts of land. Is that why banks make you donate a small portion of the separate property to a spouse before they agree to a loan so that they can tie up 2 people on it?
Sometimes the banks do that, but ultimately it's kind of up to the closing attorney. I don't see that many donations like you just described for the most part. What I do see is a clear statement in a deed that these parties are married. However, party Y is using their separate funds to pay for this house, initiating a reimbursement claim. Sometimes there's a separate document that's not filed, signed, where the other party acknowledges. Sometimes the party acknowledges on there. You see it done all kind of different ways, varying levels of cleanliness for, title purposes and community property purposes. But, they're typically not talking to a divorce attorney, a family law attorney when they're doing that. So how well versed is that closing attorney at the time? Or has one side of the family gone through it and they know some of the details, what to do? It's experience is a big part of it too.
Okay, a guy gets married to his wife. He works for a company for 15 years. He contributes to the 401k or the retirement. They decide to get a divorce. Is that money in the retirement subject to community property?
Absolutely. So any retirement funds, any penny made, this is kind of how I describe it. When you get married, the first day after that marriage, half of every penny you make is your spouse, including what you put into retirement. The thing with retirement, it can get confusing because a lot of times people have retirement before marriage. So then you kind of have 2 streams. You have a stream of separate community or separate property in the quadra, the 401k, whatever you want to call it, there building up during the marriage. Then you have another stream of community funds with community gains. But absolutely, retirement accounts of all times, pensions, 401ks, Roth IRAs, the whole 9 yards, SEP, all available.
Bro, I don't know if we're encouraging anybody to get married right now. Marriage has consequences. There are good ones and there are bad ones.
Marriage absolutely has consequences big time under the law. That's why I try not to refer to myself as a divorce attorney. It was so prominent in the 70s and the 80s when divorce law was really ramping up. It was a lot of animosity. Divorce, divorce, divorce. Now, to be honest with you, probably a third of my cases are unmarried couples. So what issues do I have with that? Custody and child support. But like you said, consequences of marriage, talking about divorce now, talking about spousal support, interim and final, and the big ticket, community property. And some people's community property is relatively straightforward. Okay, everything they bought, everything they had was during the marriage. A house, retirement account for dad, at a 401k and an oil and gas company. Mom was a teacher. She has, school teachers retirement, things like that.
There's some offset there.
Yeah, there's some offset there, absolutely. Normally, people that have a fair amount of assets, it could be relatively easy because you're moving pieces around.
Yeah.
If I get another attorney and there's a dozen, 15 other attorneys in town. I know when I get this case, if they're on the other side, we'll be able to settle the community property because the facts are there. Clear, straightforward. Even if we can't settle it all, we're only going to litigate an issue or two. Saves money for the client, saves stress for me and the client. Happy client, they tell other people about me.
That's why you're such a good referral. That's why I like sending people to you, because I know that you sit down and you're very honest with your client and say, look, this is going to cost a lot of money, right? And this could get really ugly, but let's try to work and play nice on some of these deals. If we have to get ugly, we will get ugly because that's where it's going, but that's not the best route. No. I don't need to make a ton of money on your case. I want you happy because I want you to send me people in the future.
Correct. Right. I'd rather have 10 $5,000 cases with happy people, less stress going out the door, than one $50,000 case.
Right. It's 10 closed cases.
Right. 10 closed cases. And people don't want this to go on for forever, even though they might come into my office thinking, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, scorched earth. No, you don't. You might think you want that now, but that's not really what you want. And you're right. I don't bullshit. I don't sugarcoat. You're screwed on this. You have a good chance on that. I don't know on that. People ask me percentages all the time. Flip a coin.
Right.
Because there's stuff that's going to come out. Because people are, unfortunately, always honest with their attorney. I find out things in the back end. Well, you could have told me this early on. You filled out this questionnaire. I asked you this at the consult, and a month later, you didn't tell me. So don't hide things from me. On the other hand, you have people that are doing great, and they hit a snag somewhere in a new relationship while litigation's going on, and it'll sink their case.
Life happens.
Life happens. Absolutely.
Yeah. I tell everyone, be honest with your attorney. You have the highest level of protection for the communications you have with your attorney. It's confidential. It's privileged. Why would you not tell your lawyer? And that's the same in personal injury as it is in family law. Right. I want to know where all the bodies are buried, right? Because then there will be no surprises. The less amount of surprises I have, the better representation I can give.
Absolutely.
So this is the beauty of law have mercy. You're talking about these community property, excuse me. And I'm on mylouisianasuccession.com and seeing what is Louisiana under Louisiana law, what is not considered community property, and there's some legalese going on here. I'm hoping that you can break this down for me. So it says right here in the second bullet, assets acquired by a spouse with separate property or with a mix of community and separate property when the value of the community property used to acquire the asset is inconsequential in comparison with the value of the separate property used. Can you please break that down for me?
So if it's a minimal cost coming out from separate property to community, this literally kind of makes it easy for the court to more or less just say, look, we're going to lump it in. We're going to count it as X or Y so you don't have to fight about it.
Yeah.
And that's, little things putting down, well, yeah, that was my car, but you added the $2,000 this, that, and the other to it. So is it, community funds being used to enhance my separate property? Look, if it's inconsequential sometimes, you don't count it. And likewise, I know you said that you pulled it from a succession site. Something else that people worry about, what about my inheritance? When you get that inheritance, it is definitely your separate property 9 times out of 10. But you have to be careful what you use it on, what those fruits and what the growth on that inheritance does. Okay, your parents gifted you with this retirement account that they socked money away in for 20 years without you knowing. Well, what about that now? What are those funds now? Sure, the base value when you were married is absolutely your separate property. But if you didn't reserve certain fruits and revenues and they were done through no hard work or labor of your action, that could be community value.
Yeah, that's another great word from family law is commingling, right? And so if you inherit money, it's separate property. Now, if you take it and you put it into the joint account, the community account, and you take out 500, you put 1,000, you take out 2,000, you put 500, and it starts getting commingled, and we can't readily identify it from looking at a few bank statements, then you pretty much lost your right to that separate property.
Yes and no.
I knew you were going to say yes.
The one word.
Such a good lawyer.
The one word you didn't add to commingling was hopelessly commingled. That's the phrase where you see in court cases where it was such a nightmare that the court would throw their hands up. You'd have 2 CPAs, 2 attorneys, sometimes a third CPA, everybody arguing for it. Each party has their own expert. The court may have their own expert to try to figure it out. That was very prevalent, like we said, when in the 80s when divorce really ramped up, community property, custody was just nasty. Things like that. You can't figure out where the money went. Now, with the advent of electronic banking and records being held longer, and a judge who's willing to do the work. And one of my favorite judges here, locally in the 15th JDC, said, look, it's not that really hopelessly commingled anymore. If I can get the records, I'll figure it out, or the attorney should be able to figure it out for me. So that's why I say yes and no. A lot of it depends on records. How far back can you go? The IRS, and again, whoever you have for your tax podcast can probably answer this better than me. IRS only has to keep your returns for so many years. If you're dealing with a 30-year marriage, forget about divorce documents for divorce from 25, 30 years ago. But recently I have had a case where I had to go back 17 years. Tax records were gone. Bank records, forget about it. They were gone at the 3 or 7 year mark. How did we get financial details? Social Security benefits. So all the quarters, everything they put in, Social Security kept that better than the tax records to figure out what that person was grossing and or netting. Some minimal details, but details nonetheless for the income for those years. That was 20 years before.
So if you're listening to this and you get some separate property from an inheritance or some type of other form of separate property, keep it in a separate bank account, because then you don't have to pay for 2 or 3 lawyers. You don't have to pay for all competing CPAs. You don't have to ask the judge to go through spreadsheets for the last 10 years. Keep it separate and don't hopelessly commingle it in the bank account.
And sometimes you have to give notice. The laws changed right around when you and I were taking the bar. I think in 08 or 09, the laws changed on what kind of notice you had to give the party, saying, look, you used to be able to just have a document, stick it in a dresser drawer, right? The dresser drawer deed that we learned about in law school. Put it in there. 20 years later, look, honey, I reserved all these fruits from this separate property. You don't get any of it. No notice. Now you have to give them notice. Ideally, you give them notice in front of a notary. They sign off 2 witnesses. You file it in the clerk's records, especially if it deals with some kind of physical property, immovable property, land, or a business. They get full notice. They can't come. A lot harder to argue against it,
Yeah, I would imagine that most of the divorces, like when it comes to community property here in Louisiana, it's not the Hollywood, multi-million-dollar situations. It's usually a car, 2 cars, a house, some bank accounts, maybe a retirement account or 2. We're not talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Every now and then, I do have some high earner clients, people that have inherited a family business, or someone that is a doctor or a big business owner where their income is greater than $30,000 a month, let's say. For child support purposes, it's off the charts. The court's willing to do what they want to do. So there are some big ones like that, and then there's lots of small ones and everything in between.
Do you like taking the big ones on?
I don't mind it. It really, a lot of it, to be honest with you, the wealthier the client sometimes, the less animosity in the case. They know they don't want to pay an attorney. They have plenty to go around and split up as long as they feel like they got a fair and adequate, judgment, that their voice was heard and they participated in it. They're fine.
Do you ever take on the husband and the wife together and help them resolve it? Or you always handle one party? I
have to take one part. Ethically in Louisiana, you can't represent both parties. Attorneys, especially some well-known and attorneys with more experience than me, some attorneys been on the bench, been a member of the bar for 30, 40 years, have done that in a roundabout way or try to be sneaky around it. I can only represent one party. I make that very clear when one person comes in for a consult. If one person meets with me and they bring the other person, I said, look, leave that person in the car or up front. They never enter into my inner sanctum in the back. And I make it very clear. That person retains me. And I tell them, look, I'm more than willing to work with the other party. They're free to go get an attorney. They can ask me questions. I will answer them honestly and openly. Now, if they don't ask me the right questions, I don't have to answer them because I'm not representing them. Kids with cases, I always try to put the kids first. Next, it's my clients. Clients that don't have any kids, they're number one. The other party's always going to be second. But again, the client and the facts drive the case more than me and my opinion of things.
Let's assume that I send you a friend of mine who goes and says, I want to file divorce, me and my wife, or me and my girlfriend, and we have kids. Everybody's on the same page. You have them. I'm sure you could prepare all the paperwork.
Correct.
Right, for your client, and then advise the other party that they should get an attorney and probably put that in writing somewhere. Right. And they can waive that right and then sign off on the paperwork. And then the two of them work it out. they pay one attorney, and you could file the paperwork that way.
Right. So that's
Am I off base there?
That's very common.
Okay.
Typically, the only time you have to advise another party in writing and get that in writing from them, an unrepresented party, is community property. That's when I do it. But for like simple service of a divorce, rather than a sheriff's deputy go knock on their door, come into my office. I'll meet with you up front. You're not my client. My secretary will be there watching third-party eyes the whole time. Sign off on a waiver of service. Look, this is your chance. Go talk to an attorney. This is what we filed. I can email you in a couple of days with what the proposal is from my client, your soon-to-be ex-spouse, and maybe we'll get it all done. Then they'll come back in, and if it deals with certain things, I'll get them to sign off in front of either me as a notary or a third-party notary with 2 witnesses, and they could settle everything. I'll file it. My client signs off. Their attorney underneath. The other side is improper person or pro se, representing themselves. Instead of an attorney's address or contact information, it's that person's address. Boom, you're fine and done.
I would say that they're spending half of what they would be spending had she hired a lawyer or he hired a lawyer, the other side, but it's really more than half, right? Because just by the adversarial nature of divorce, you got to be cutting more than half the cost if they agree and
if they agree, absolutely. You know, and a lot of times it unfortunately depends on the attorney on the other side. Are they going to try to build a case and make some issues that aren't there? Are they going to be direct forward and get it done? And so much of it doesn't depend on the client sometimes, or even the facts. It depends on the other attorney and how they would approach it. And what I like to do, I like to try to predict what I think is good, fair, reasonable, equitable. Look, this is how I'd like to see your case go based on what you've done in the past and where you're at now. And what will it take for us to get there? Are we going to have to litigate it or not? 9 times out of 10, a client will follow my lead. They'll say, yeah, this makes sense. Okay, I didn't know about that. Now you've informed me. I'm okay with this. You know, and that's kind of where their case goes, and it's up to them at that point.
Without naming names, let's assume you're Batman. Do you have any jokers in town? Do you have any arch rivals?
Not really true arch rivals. There's a short list, maybe 3, 5, 6, 7 at the most, of where I know if they get a case, unfortunately, we're going to have to litigate something. And the other thing is the other 20, 30 attorneys in town that I get along swimmingly well with, they know who those people are. You know, we know the family law world in a 7-parish area isn't that huge. We have the main players, attorneys who do it all the time, some who dabble in it, some who don't like to do it but have to do it to pay the bills, some who just feel like they can do everything. You know, so it's unfortunate. Like you said, there are a few jokers, penguins,
so you got
Riddlers out
the
there.
Joker,
Yeah.
the Penguin, the Riddler.
Right.
Right. And then it's like, if you see that trend, it's like, well, every case can't be that bad. It's just that particular lawyer that makes it that bad.
Right. And it's unfortunate. And sometimes even despite those attorneys that I maybe don't get along well with, or I know who are just adversarial, like to go through those other steps, sometimes the case is too straightforward. They can't make it into this nightmare blow up because the parties are getting along that well. So sometimes even then, you know, you can get along good. Likewise, people that when I see their name on the other side, I'm so happy. I'm so glad to go up against ABC attorney.
Because we know we can work it out.
I know we can work it out, but then the case is just a nightmare. It's very few issues are black and white.
Right.
Nobody wins in divorce, right? It's the death of a marriage, the death of a relationship. Nobody wins in child custody. You're not seeing your kid all the time. Simple as that.
Your best bet is half.
The best bet is half. And even then, it's not fair. Everybody deserves to see their kid every morning, is my opinion, but you can't do it in divorce. Child support, same thing. Nobody wins. You're not getting enough or you're getting too much. And child support's calculated 2 ways in the state. Very not fair. Community property, same thing. There's no way to quantify those things. So not a lot of black and white in my area of law, unfortunately.
So let's say your opponent hires Joker, and then a person comes into your office and wants to hire you, and you see that Joker's on the other side. Are you charging more?
Sometimes, yeah. I unfortunately say, look,
hey, let's call it for what it is.
Your deposit's going to go up because I know they're going to at least do X, Y, and Z before attempting settlement. Or, you know, sometimes maybe it doesn't. I just prepare the client. Like, look, I know how this operates. They're going to look through issues that may or may not even be there just to do it. And sometimes they consider it due diligence. Sometimes it's not. You could be real world. You know, it's...
Bro, that's so frustrating.
Yeah.
That is so frustrating. I mean, that I encountered that in my brief period of practicing family law of how, because family law, you get so much pressure from the client, right? And I've said this many times. You're going straight to heaven. I mean, like, boom.
I'd try, but
right? Because you have the patience of a saint, right? Yep. But you're getting so much pressure because it's so emotionally charged. And I can put myself in their shoes. I mean, you're talking about kids, you're talking about bank account, like kids and money and a home. Hello. Right. Oh, my car, right? And so you're trying to do the best you can, and you know that they're tapped out financially, stress-wise, whatever. And then you got to deal with a difficult client, a difficult lawyer on the other side.
Right.
I don't know how you do it, man.
It's all about.
You just shrug it off.
It's all about balance. Well, look, I'm as stressed out as any attorney, for sure.
Right.
You know, and I feel like sometimes I live my clients' lives, even though I haven't done the things they do. I'm not in their shoes. But I also think that's why I'm so good, and why I get so many good referrals from good people. Is that, you know, everybody says, "Oh, the caring attorney, this person." Look, I'm not burned out yet. I know some older attorneys feel like they're burned out. Some attorneys, Wes, give it 25 years. You'll be so jaded. You won't care about this. No, I'm always going to care.
Yeah.
And that's why I try to advise people to minimize stress and do that. When they don't listen to my advice is when it really kind of comes back to bite them, but then I feel the stress too. I find some attorneys, they don't care. They'll shoot from the hip. They'll throw it up in the air. They see it as a billable hour. They'll move on. You know, and whether or not they get bad references and people don't go to them, I don't know. You know, but yeah, it's
how do you shake it off? I mean, I the older I get, ironically, I don't become more jaded. I'm less jaded than ever. I love what I do, but I sleep well at night. Probably for the first 10 years of my career, I didn't sleep well at night. Right. because I was thinking about cases all day. Now I do what I can from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then I'm at peace with it because I'm better at what I do.
Right.
Really.
Right.
How do you cope with that stress?
Same thing. You leave it at the office and try not to let it follow you.
And there's times when you probably slip up and you're a little more aggravated at home, and nobody's perfect.
Right. Absolutely. And and I tell clients all the time, like, look, I might not be accessible 24 hours by phone, but I'm 24 hours by email. And I know the ones that have a kid missing, someone got out of jail, that are very high tense stuff. I'm on call 24/7 on those. I've had interstate cases where the police were literally going 6 states away, pick up a child forcefully. Yeah, I need to be in the minute, in the zone the whole time till that kid comes back to the parent. You know, but yeah, how do I deal with stress? Like you said, I've been blessed with an abundance of patience. You know, I'm so fortunate to have a lot of good things in my personal life to where, yes, my stressor can be work, but I try not to let that come home and affect me with my wife, my kids, my family, the things I like to do. The work-life balance, like you and I have discussed before.
Yeah. Kaylee actually brought up to my attention. She said, Chaz, she brought up a great point I never thought of. She's like, the two things that you do. Now, I enjoy coaching youth athletics. Right. Obviously, we've coached together.
Correct.
The two things that you do for fun, running marathons, 4 hours of running, and boxing, getting punched in the face. Like, those are the two things that you choose to escape. That says a lot about how stressful your job is, that you would choose those two paths to escape.
Yeah.
What do you do for fun?
I like to spend time with my family. My wife told me several years ago that music festivals, concerts was her love language, and I've taken that to the full. So her and I try to keep a busy social schedule. We do plenty of Mardi Gras events. We go to parties around Christmas time with different groups of friends, and we go to music festivals. We're going to Atlanta in a few months for one. We're going to do Jazz Fest. We do Festival International here, plenty of things like that. We also have our shows we watch, whether it's Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, whatever. We hear recommendations from friends. We get involved. We watch that together. Then my boys, you know I am, just like you, father with two sons. One is more along my lines, kind of nerdy, and likes all these nerdy things, so I'm all in with him. My other one was the jock that I kind of always wanted to be. So sporting events. We go to LSU games, UL games, Saints, stuff like that. I can watch as many sports as I want with him. The other one, sci-fi. Let's do as much science fiction stuff as we can. Like you said, I'm involved. I coach, have assistant coach in some sports things. I'm a scout leader for both of them. One's in Boy Scouts, one's in Cub Scouts. So all that combined, I mean, I love it because my weekends are mostly filled. and it's either with my wife, son A, son B, whatever, and that's a good release. It shows me how blessed I am and what I have and how fortunate, I really, really am.
Are any of them showing any kind of interest in the law or what you think, a lawyer would be? I mean, do you bring them to the office? Any of that
They
stuff?
come to the office with me. I like to have a policy when I do have to work on Saturdays. I try to always bring one of them with me to have some kind of minimal quality time. I look at them and that's what I'm working for. That's my drive. And we hang out, whether they're building a Lego set, playing on a tablet, reading a book, we'll go get some fun lunch somewheres, they see it. I would say my oldest one is too creative to be an attorney. He wouldn't like it as much. My youngest,
Good for him. Good for him.
And that's what I tell him. My youngest is pure D would be an attorney if he's not going to be a major league pitcher. That's where he's at. He's a talker. He's good. I have to say, proud dad moment. He recently won the spelling bee at school,
Awesome.
not only for his grade, but 2 grade levels up. Like, who is this kid?
Yeah.
And that brains is from my wife, not from me.
Yeah.
Maybe he'd be an attorney, but to be honest with you, sometimes I'd be fine if they'd both be attorneys. Sometimes I say, guys, I don't know if y'all want the stress. Go run a business somewhere.
Right. Well, being an attorney is, look at what we do. We're having this conversation about family law, but we're doing completely different things.
Right.
You don't know much about personal injury. I don't know much about family. And you could be a senator. You can be a politician. You can own a business. You can run a business. You can be a lobbyist. I mean, there's so many avenues you can go with a law degree.
Right.
And I think that's the appeal of why so many people become lawyers.
And that's exactly why I decided to get it, because of the flexibility. Going to LSU for undergrad, I knew that I wanted a job where I'd interact with other people, help people kind of directly, but I'd figured by freshman year, okay, I'm going to go to law school just for the flexibility of a law degree. And my dad's friends who were attorneys, that's what they said. Wes, get that degree, but don't make sure you have the open mindset that maybe I won't be an attorney. Maybe I'll do this or that, and another advice of a judge here in town, he's like, Wes, you did your 4 years in Baton Rouge. Get a new scenery around. Why don't you go to law school in New Orleans? So that was a big push for. I went to Loyola too, another city, whole new set of friends to meet, things like that, and gave me perspective too.
Did you ever think you'd be a family lawyer?
No, I always thought I'd probably do oil and gas law because that's kind of where my family background was. One of my grandfathers was a tugboat captain, owned 2 riverboats. The other one worked offshore as a superintendent for all kind of big major companies. My dad was a petroleum engineer, so I always thought oil and gas jobs. Summers of college, do land manning work, oil and gas land manning work. And that's where I actually started. After I clerked for a year in general jurisdiction, then about 4 months or so in family court, I got hired away by an oil and gas land company. Went do that, title opinions, big transactional work, negotiating with landowners or companies, things like that. I liked it. For whatever reason, God said, that's not what you're going to do. I saw the market going down in 13. And I found an older attorney here in town and started 14, went into his office, opened my own shop and learned family law and went from there. 10 years later, still doing it.
The next question I have, because I never envisioned it, but did you ever think you would have your own shop?
Whenever I was probably a year or 2 into family law, I realized that there are some firms in town, but for the most part, clients want to deal with one attorney. When it comes to family law, they wouldn't want Wes and his associates. They would want Wes. So my own shop, I was never afraid of it or anything like that. It was kind of inevitable. I do think, on the other hand, it makes sense sometimes to at least office share or have some kind of minimal, agreement or understanding with another attorney to lower expenses, have somebody to cover for you back and forth.
Yeah. So I was thinking back to when, I'm like one of the OGs all of a sudden because we're 15 years in. And so I've been practicing on my own since I'm about 26. Yeah. I only lasted 9 months with a defense firm, right? And then I basically went out and hung my shingle. I remember being in law school. I didn't have lawyers in my family. I didn't really know any lawyers, so I didn't know what to expect. I remember thinking in law school, I was like, man, maybe when I'm like 45, I'll have my own shop. And I just assumed I would work for someone else. And here it is. I've been on my own for about 13, 14 years. I couldn't imagine any other way.
Right.
It's amazing how that happens.
It is. And, being your own boss, you have all the stress, but you also have all the benefits, and like you said, whether we thought it would happen at 35 or 55, you never really know. But here we are.
It's cool, man. So Where can people find you, Wes? Do you have a website now? Last time, I don't think you had the website.
I have a website now, and look, it's galjourlaw.com. Simple as that. And my number is 337-534-0111. The wild thing is that one of the first things people write when they come in for a consultation is, how did you hear about me? No one ever says the website. It's always from other clients, somebody I know from in town, or other attorneys, and it's a referral driven business as much as any type of law, because it's so personal. I build these relationships with people. I know their deepest, darkest secrets. I know their greatest hopes, their fears. I see their kids grow up. I mean, I've represented people for 10 plus years now. So I've seen some people that had a 6-month-old baby that is now 10 and a half years old. And I've tracked it, and maybe not hear from them for a year or two, but something happens. They have to update child support, have to update custody this way. And I hear from them, and you reconnect like that,
We're those old dogs. I used to go in the conference room and say, I know I look young, but I really have a lot of experience, 6-7 years. And now people are like, dude, you got all that gray hair on the side. You don't need to preface it anymore.
Right.
We know you've been around the block for a while.
Exactly.
Wes, thank you so much, man.
Appreciate it, Chaz. My pleasure.
Enjoy the trip, bro.
For sure. Thank you.
Hey, it would mean the world to me if you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a 5-star review. It helps keep the show free, and it helps us book better guests to provide more valuable content to you. None of the opinions expressed by my guests are that of my own, and nothing we talked about creates an attorney-client relationship or could be construed as legal advice. Hope you enjoy the show.
This podcast is powered by Acadiana Cast Network. Go to acadianacast.com for more South Louisiana sourced content.